ceases to amaze me. There's one segment of the population that always asks why. Who is it? Who?
The young ones.
The young ones. Children, right? And you notice as we've gotten older as adults, we've stopped asking why. We just learn what we need to do, we learn how to do it, and then we do it, but we stop asking why. Now, Jim Rohn, who was a very successful businessman and became a very successful motivational speaker, in fact, he actually mentored Tony Robbins for many years, says that the bigger the why, the easier the how. And today, I want to share with you some of my whys of how I went on to build a $1.5 million reoccurring revenue practice and was able to sell it in 13 short years for several $million. Think back when you were in elementary school. You were 7 or 8 years old, and you were daydreaming about what it was you wanted to be someday. Does anybody remember what that was? Let me hear it.
A millionaire at 35.
A millionaire at 35. What else?
Astronaut.
Astronaut.
Fighter pilot.
Fighter pilot.
Engineer.
Engineer.
Baseball player.
Baseball player. What about the women?
Veterinarian.
Veterinarian. Every little girl wants to be a veterinarian, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to be a pilot. I don't know why, it just sounded kind of cool. And by the time I was 18, I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to enroll at MIT, that's Metro in town. And I want to take aeronautical science courses, and I want to learn to fly. And he said, that's great, only I can't help you financially. I can only offer you moral support. Now, work was not a foreign concept to me. I was one of 7 brothers and sisters. And so my dad, frankly, couldn't afford to put any of us through school on his meager salary of being a union electrician. So I started thinking about what I was going to do. And my first career, I'd worked since I was 11, and I was now 18. My first career, I was a paper girl. And then I had a lot of jobs up until I was 18. And so in 1980, the minimum wage was $3.10 an hour. And I thought, oh, it's going to take me a while to save money for school. So I started looking around and came across the construction industry. And I found a job as a construction laborer that paid $10.50 an hour, more than 3 times the minimum wage. And for those of you who don't know, the construction laborer is the person that does all the dirty work on the job. You know, I dug ditches, I oiled these plywood platforms for pouring concrete, I helped pour concrete, I picked up trash, I drove the big flatbed truck, and I endured enough sexual harassment in 2 years to last me a lifetime. And I can tell you, I was one of the original Me Too's. This is not a new phenomenon, ladies. It's been going on a long time. But after 2 years, I was able to quit the construction industry. I'd saved enough money, and I enrolled at MIT. I took aeronautical science courses, and I learned to fly. I became a pilot. And while I was going to school, I thought it'd be really neat to work in the aviation industry. So once again, I was willing to do whatever it took. And why? Because I wanted to work around airplanes. So I got a job at the airport as what we affectionately called a ramp rat. And that again is all the menial labor around the airport. I fueled airplanes when they'd come in. I'd wash them, clean them up. I'd even park them, you know, when they drove in. And then I would stack the hangars, which meant I would pull airplanes in and out of the hangars. Until one day, best day of my life happened. Anybody want to take a guess?
Got fired?
I got fired. Yes.
Got fired?
And it literally launched me into the financial services industry. I needed a job, and I figured my aviation career was kind of washed up. And so I went to work for a woman who owned her own high-risk auto insurance agency. And she's the one that planted that seed in my head of becoming a financial advisor. Now, I had a pretty good grasp of numbers, but I didn't finish school. I had dropped out. But I thought, well, what the heck? So I went to work for Mutual of New York. And it was funny, they almost didn't hire me because I didn't have a college degree. And the manager said, well, you don't have a college degree. And I said, well, it's a commission job, right? What do you got to lose? I was Rookie of the Year that year. And I would work for them for 3 years, get my securities license, and eventually started working for Liberty Securities, which was in a bank program here in Denver. And I worked for Liberty. I was in the bank about 6 years, and then we opened up an independent office outside the bank because the banks were all internalizing their programs at that time. But for 11 of the 13 years, I was the #1 advisor in the country, 500 reps. So for 16 years, I worked for somebody else until one day I had what Michael Gerber, from his book, The E-Myth Revisited, calls an entrepreneurial seizure. And it goes something like this. You're just working along for somebody else, and this little thought pops into your head, and it says, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this for them? I know more about this business than they do. And in fact, if it weren't for me, they wouldn't even have a business. Any idiot can run a business. I'm working for one. Once I had that seizure, the thought of opening my own company followed me around every single day. And, cutting the corporate cord, getting away from Liberty, I thought about it all the time. Until March 2nd of 2000, I opened Abacus Financial Group. Now, the significance of that date, for those of you who haven't been with LPL for at least 20 years, that was the date that LPL went from Pershing clearing platform to a self-clearing platform. Has anybody been with LPL at least 20 years? Do you remember that in this room? So I was the first self-clearing rep on the platform, but I didn't know it at the time. I was the guinea pig, and it all worked out. But the reason, or the why for me, is why I wanted to go into business for myself was twofold. First of all, I wanted to be a true fiduciary with my clients. I wanted to do what was in their best interest and offer independent advice. And I wanted to offer things that we weren't offering, like financial planning. We were just selling investments, that's all. And the second reason was I wanted to see if I could build a practice that I could actually sell someday. So the first thing I decided I needed to do, I felt that it was incumbent upon me, if I was going to require my clients to do financial plans, that I have a financial plan for myself. And I mean a real financial plan, not just like a little retirement, plan, but looking at my goals, looking at my taxes, looking at my estate plan, looking at my insurance, looking at everything. And I've asked a number of advisors over the last several years if they have their own plan. And I get all sorts of ambiguous answers from people, which leads me to believe they don't have what I would consider a real financial plan. I know exactly where I'm at. And I'm like, oh, well, how often do you look at it? Oh, every so often. Well, how do you know that you're on track? Oh, I just know. I put stuff in Wealth Vision about 4 years ago, and it's fine. I looked at my plan regularly, like every 6 months or so. And my business, I had a plan for my business too. This was another thing that really surprised me in talking with a lot of the advisors I've talked with over the years. Very few actually do financial statements for their business. and they commingle their personal and their business finances. And it's like, well, how do you know what you're doing over here and what you're doing over here? Is your business truly profitable? So, and financial statements, all I'm talking about is a profit and loss, a balance sheet, a general ledger, and a budget to know what it is you're spending. Because this is a lucrative business. We got a lot of money coming in. It's easy to overspend. And I have to admit, I always thought I spent less than I did. I always thought I earned more than I was earning. You know, I always thought I was on track, and then when I would look at things, I'd go, oh wow, I need to save more or spend less, right? So the second reason I mentioned I wanted to have my own business was so I could have an asset that I could sell someday. Now, the Business Planning Institute, or it's called Exit Planning Institute rather, is an institute that works with all businesses. And they say, they didn't give a specific percentage, but they did say most businesses never sell. They didn't say some, they say most. And the reason is because the owner never takes the critical steps of preparing the business for a transition. And all that value just evaporates. I'll give you an example. My significant other, Gary, owned the largest Honda motorcycle dealership in North America, right here in Denver. And when he was 57, I mean, what could go wrong, right? You own the biggest motorcycle dealership. And when he was about 57, my age now, his wife asked him for a divorce. Lucky me. But about a year and a half into his divorce, his motorcycle shop burnt to the ground. January 2nd, 2002. And that wasn't bad enough. He was fighting with the insurance company, fighting with the banks, and the city wouldn't let him rebuild in the location that he had been at. His dad opened the shop in 1948, and he took it over in the 70s and built it into this iconic shop. But he couldn't rebuild it where he wanted to. He had to move it clear out to Arapahoe Road, where it is today. Well, 15 months later, we had this huge snowstorm. Does anybody remember this, 2003? Mm-hmm. It caved the roof in on the motorcycle shop. He lost 600 motorcycles in that one. And he was forced to sell his business. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. And he got about 1/10 of the value of that business that he would have had he just really planned ahead. I got half my net worth from the sale of my business. So I know there are a lot of advisors, and I've talked to many of them, that they say they're going to work forever in this business. And I would say, great, work forever in the business if you want, but extract your value from it. Sell it, and then write in the contract that you want to stay working for a certain period of time, or do something. The average age of an advisor is 55 years old today. And 20% of the advisors are over age 65. There's only about 11% that are under 40. We have what's called a generational crisis going on in our industry. And someday there are going to be more practices for sale than there are going to be people to acquire them. And I can tell you the younger advisors, they're really into this new technology, and they're looking at some of the older guys' practices and going, I don't want to buy that practice, the technology sucks. And LPL is very, very concerned about this. Since I've been associated with them for 20 years, this is all they've talked about. And only about 1/3 of the advisors out there actually even have a succession plan. In fact, I'm going to poll the audience here, and I want to see, if you're an advisor in the audience, I want you to raise your hand if you have a succession plan in place, meaning you have a document that at least names somebody in the event you croak. or you become disabled. Okay, good. Keep your hands up as I ask the next questions. And think, if you answer a no, please put your hand down, okay? In your agreement, does it say how it's going to be valued if you die or become disabled? What they're going to pay you or your family? Okay, no. What about, does the agreement state how that person is going to take care of your clients? In other words, do they do the same thing that you do? Okay. Okay, we got one left standing here. Have you talked about where the location is going to be? Are you going to keep both locations? Another question is, are they going to keep your employees? Have you talked about that? Here is the critical question. Have you introduced your clients to your successor? Usually when I ask that question to an audience like this, that's the question that everybody's hands goes down. Very, very critical that your clients know who's going to take over. When I sold my practice, I worked with the advisor that I was selling to for a whole year before I would sell him the practice, because I wanted to make sure my clients liked him and trusted him and thought he was and were confident in him. And I wanted to make sure that we did things the same way. And David Morrison bought my practice. He's with Prosperian. And David actually used values-based financial planning, but he was on the 5.0 scale. I was on the 1.0 when I learned all that. So David was teaching me things for our clients that I hadn't even done yet. And I had a lot of suitors over the years. I kissed a lot of frogs before I found just the right one. In fact, when I started on this path, this journey of thinking about selling my business as a going concern, I wanted to make sure that I could sell it as a turnkey operation. And the more processes you have in place, the easier it is for somebody to take over versus just trying to wing it. So David and I worked together, and he bought my practice, and I stayed on for 3 more years. I was 50 years old. I sold my practice really in 2012. And I didn't retire for 3 more years, so I was 53, almost 54. But I thought about that. I'd worked since I was 11, 39 years. I thought, yeah, that's probably enough. But I had, and I'm going to suggest you do this, is I had other financial advisors run my plan for me. Because I wanted to make sure I was seeing the forest for the trees. And if you think you've got your plan in place, have another advisor look at it. In fact, pay another advisor to do it for you. And that will tell you if you're missing anything. But I had 3 different advisors over the years, including myself, so 4 of us looking at it. I was pretty sure I could retire, or I could sell my practice. The second reason that I did was because, well, actually, let me back up for just a minute. I was at an advisory event about a month ago, and I sat down with an advisor and his wife. And he asked me, what do you do? And I told him I coach financial advisors on how to run their practices as a business. And he said, oh, I don't need a coach. He said, I'm on easy street. I'm 66 years old. I'm going to work another 10 years, and then my daughter's taking over my practice. I got it all figured out. I said, oh, wow, that's great. You're further ahead than most. And I said, so is your daughter working for you? No, she's a receptionist at another firm right now. I said, oh. So what's the plan for bringing her in? Oh, we have plenty of time. I'm letting them train her, and we're just going to let it just happen. And I said, so you're 66. At 10 years, you'll be 76. How do you know you have that much time? And he looked at me, kind of like all you look at me, like, what do you mean, 76 isn't that old. I mean, I think, quite frankly, a lot of us, we have a hard time with our own mortality and how long, I mean, otherwise we probably wouldn't get out of bed every day, right? If we didn't have some hope that we're going to live longer, right? And I said, let me give you some unsolicited advice. Bring your daughter in right now and have her work for you and train her how you want to train her and introduce her to your clients now. And he's like, oh, but we have plenty of time. And I'm like, how do you know? And I said, as a semi-retired person, if I were your client and something happened to you, and I've never met your daughter, I'm sure she's really nice and she's very smart, but it's the first time I'm meeting her is when she's taking over your practice. I'm not so sure I'd feel comfortable staying with her. How experienced is she? Is she competent? Can I have confidence in her? And just last week, I had a call with another advisor, a real good friend of mine, big advisor here in town. And we were trying to figure out if we were going to ski together last week. And he said, Syb, I'm working on my 25-year plan. He's 62 years old. And I said, Jim, 62? I said, you're only 62. That makes you 87, right? And he's like, yeah, but he says, I love this industry. I want to work in it forever. In fact, I hope I stroke out at my desk. And I said, and now I know his daughter is working with him. And I said, well, how's she doing? And he said, she's doing great. She's working with all the small accounts, and she's been doing phenomenal. And I said, you need to have her working alongside of you with the big accounts. Because if you stroke out at your desk before age 87, you want your clients to know who she is and be comfortable with working with her. So it's great if you had, I didn't have any children that could take over my practice, unfortunately. But that's a great solution, but just make sure that they are the right ones to take over your practice. So I sold my business at 50, as I mentioned, because I worked in general for 39 years. But the second most important reason I sold my practice is because Gary, who I talked about earlier, the love of my life, was 18 years older than me. Now, when I met him, he was probably the fittest person you would ever have met. When he was younger, he raced motocross. You have to be super fit for that. He was a state champion here in Colorado. He raced motorcycles in Europe. But he was into mountain bike racing when I met him. And he wasn't just an ordinary mountain biker. He had won several national championships, and he'd even won 2 world championships. He was super active, and that's part of why I fell in love with him. And secretly and selfishly, I thought that Gary would be taking care of me because his mom's 96 years old. And my parents both died at age 70. Gary passed away last August. And I would have bet every dollar I had that would have never happened. So people ask me all the time, Sybil, why are you doing this? Well, everything I've told you today didn't come from me. I didn't make any of it up. I had great coaches, and I took their suggestions and I did the work. And I observed great advisors, and I wanted what they had. I wanted to emulate them. I also observed very bad advisors, and I did not want to make the mistakes that they made. So understanding your why, my why is you. I firmly believe that you can have whatever it is you want as long as you help enough people get what they want. And we're in a great business to do that. We never know what life's going to hand us, right? But if you know your why, you can always be prepared. Thank you.